when games were simple. Oh, that sound feels so good. It feels so good. Oh. And then you just hoped that your game disc wasn't scratched. Because that happened to me a few too many times.
Do you ever think back to when video games were just simple? When games could just be games and you could be an idiot 6-year-old who can't figure out how to get off the starting island in Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah, you actually, you gotta hit the tree to get the coconuts. The coconuts will fall down.
Hit it? Yeah. It feels like back then they could just make anything they wanted to. Studios took...
I got stuck a few too many times in early levels of games because I was a stupid kid that couldn't think of the actual way to do it.
Chances, building experiences that, while not perfect, were still iconic. And don't get it twisted, all right? I like the AAA games we're getting right now. I'm definitely not saying that video games aren't fun anymore. But I can't help looking back at all these older games and missing the charm that they all had, especially compared to now. They definitely weren't all fantastic, but when I look back at them, they all just seem so whimsical and wonderfully simple to me. And sure, you know, that opinion is probably largely shaped around nostalgia, and it's more likely I miss the simpler times in my life, which we'll talk about nostalgia more towards the end of the video, but I do mean this literally. I adore the simplicity of the games from this era. When I talk about a time when video games...
Yeah, look, everybody's going to miss the times when they had zero responsibilities and they could just sit down and play a game. Everybody loves those times. But yeah, if you have a game that is not overly convoluted and taking itself too seriously and you can just sit down and have some fun with it, God, I miss those games. There's not enough of them anymore, especially like made by big studios.
Were simple. I think a different time period probably comes to each of our heads, right? For you, it might be the PS1 or even the Atari if you're ancient and decaying. For me, I think of the PS2 and just all those classic games from that console. Like Kingdom Hearts, Jak and Daxter, Sly Cooper, Ratchet and Clank, the weird game with the alien face on the cover that kind of freaked me out too much to pick up. The hundreds of stupid licensed games that came out around this time that were all just exactly the same, except that one. I loved that one. When every game didn't have to be a groundbreaking.
I never had the Simpsons Hit and Run, but like so many of my friends did, and it was so much fun. I remember going over to their houses and being like, I wish I had this game, but I could only convince my parents to get so many games. So,
breaking cinematic masterpiece, and it could just be a fun game. One aspect I really admire about those PS2 games is that they seem to prioritize gameplay and fun over anything. Whereas anymore, it seems gameplay gets sidelined by the cutscenes and the story. The gaming industry has changed a lot over the years, okay? It's not your grandpa's GameCube anymore. We got esports teams and VR chat twerk-offs now. The Last of Us is a phenomenal game series that tells...
And I will say that it's people streaming games and like competitive gaming has ruined some of the fun in gaming to an extent. Like I used to have fun going over to a friend's house and playing Call of Duty, and we would even playing online. And now I get fragged in 3 seconds every 3 seconds for not knowing how to like slide and then dodge and then flip and then do the thing and whatever. You have to press a million buttons rapid fire, and you're not actually enjoying the game because you can't see what's going on. You're just mashing buttons because you've memorized some sort of crazy combination, and it's not fun. You just know you're beating somebody, and that's what you cared about. You need to actually be able to enjoy the games a bit too.
A familiar yet strikingly unique story and has some of the best character writing I've ever seen in a video game. Due to some not so careful redactions, we learned that on their latest entry, The Last of Us Part 2, Naughty Dog spent $220 million over the course of 6 years to develop the game. To put that into perspective, they developed the first Crash Bandicoot game for $1.7 million. With that $220 million, they...
200... Oh, so that's well over 110 times the cost. I feel like they probably got a better return on... I know Last of Us did insanely well, but for the amount of money put in, Crash may or may not have done better as far as a return on investment percentage. But I would have to double check those numbers.
delivered on these stunning, cutting-edge graphics, as well as creating a gripping narrative and overall impactful experience. But when you play these games, it becomes abundantly clear that The Last of Us does not embrace its identity as a video game at all. The gameplay loop consists of you walking around slowly, looking at everything like you're in a museum, maybe avoiding some mushroom zombies sometimes. And if you walk into an area with waist-height walls, you know some guys are gonna come out and try to shoot at you. The combat is passable at best, and over time just becomes a boring obstacle between you and the next cutscene. It really is a shame, you know, because the world they've built is so beautiful to look at, but there's nothing to touch. I'm all for story in a game, but it should never take precedent over the actual gameplay. And hey, I'm a problem solver, all right? I'm here to help you, Naughty Dog. I'm gonna tell you exactly what you have to do to fix this problem. You go through a couple of levels, you get us really hooked in, and then you give Ellie a fishtail, and you have her swim around and sing a really bad song with Ariel from The Little Mermaid.
And the song's got to be really, really bad. Really, it's got to be horrible.
No, you're right. You can't do that, okay? It's a serious game with a serious tone. We don't need to do any of that. You know, no game has ever retained its serious tone while breaking immersion slightly for the sake of fun.
I love the fact that they are referencing Fallout New Vegas there, because that is like the epitome of ridiculousness mixed with very serious tones.
It's never been done. It's not going to happen, all right? Bad example. I'm sorry. Let's look at the Insomniac Spider-Man games instead. You know, they're wacky and less based in realism. They had a phenomenal story, except for the third act of the second game. I'm still pretty mad about that. Peter should have been Venom. I'm standing on that business. And the gameplay here, oh my God, they got it perfect. They did it. They did what Naughty Dog couldn't do. Sometimes. I could web...
Well, swinging through the air in a video game always feels fun. I used to play the DC online play as a hero game. I don't remember what it was. It was some sort of MMO. But just running through the city at super speed was always super fun, even if the actual combat and gameplay itself wasn't all that great. I still just enjoyed, hey, I got some superpowers. I like moving through the city. Movement in games is underrated as far as its importance, because that will make or break a game.
Penciling around the city all day, and they had their Little Mermaid moment with Venom and I guess Mary Jane now. That was all right. But what I want to talk to you about specifically are the mini games. You know, those little moments where it's like, oh, Peter's a scientist. Here's some scientist stuff. Match up these different colors and lines because he's a scientist. It's science stuff. Those have got to be the worst mini games ever made. And Insomniac knows it, because why else would they give you an option to skip them? It's all right, whatever. They didn't come up that much in the first one. I can get over it. At least I got to skip them and move on. Maybe they'll take them out by the second one. Wrong. It's different this time. Now it's in 3D and you got to take out the bad shapes. It's worse. It's somehow so much worse in this one. And I know it's a relatively small problem to point out, but man, just situations like this just make me miss games like Sly Cooper that would put you in a submarine and say, there's crabs coming to steal the treasure. You have to shoot all the crabs and make sure they don't come get it. They didn't bother trying to make it make sense within the story. They just made something fun. I don't think every AAA game needs to be goofy, but I do think that video games are at their best when they embrace their identity as video games and deliver experiences only they can. It seems like they really went in this direction because these cinematic games have the most wide reach. They don't really want to risk it with something that might not appeal to everyone, right? We could never get an insane concept like Kingdom Hearts made today. The idea...
Yeah, and you got to call out that the insane concept behind Kingdom Hearts gets more insane as the story goes on, because Kingdom Hearts as a whole makes like no sense after the first game. The first game, like, it's a cool idea, cool concept, and then it goes full-blown JRPG and decides to get the most convoluted story imaginable. They didn't have to do that, but for some reason they did. And it's very frustrating to try and keep up with that, especially the fact that it goes across multiple platforms and multiple console generations, and you have to play on everything from the Nintendo DS to PlayStation 2 to PlayStation 5 and God knows what else. It's a little frustrating because I loved the game. I got really hooked on it, and granted, it was a bit of nostalgia bait for me, but when I can't complete the entire series because I don't have 20 different consoles, it's a little frustrating.
Of taking these two insanely different franchises, Final Fantasy, a JRPG series, and the Disney multiverse, and mashing them together in some big world-hopping adventure led by a character nobody's ever heard of. That is just not something we would get today. And do you know how this idea came to be? Well, apparently back in the 90s, Square Enix and Disney both had offices in the same building. And one fateful day, an employee from Square Enix and an employee from Disney just so happened to end up in the same elevator. And they got to talking and they were like, "Hello, Disney employee I just met. Wouldn't it be cool to mash up our universes together and then send some kid around them beating everything up with a key?" And that, kids, is how Kingdom Hearts came to be.
That's like a very famous story about how Square Enix and Disney decided to mash up. I don't really believe it, though. Like with everything about how rigid and bureaucratic everything is in Japan, I would love to believe that story, but I don't. I'm sure it was much more formalized and there's no way that it went about that way. It would be cool if it did, but I don't think it did.
I read it on nextshark.com, so you know it's true. If there ever was a video game that embraced its identity as a video game, it is goddamn Kingdom Hearts. This game makes no sense, but is so much fun. Why the hell is Cloud from Final Fantasy making a deal with Hades and fighting in the hero games on Olympus? I don't know, who cares? I'm Sora and I'm gonna hit this big dog with a key I found. When you travel between the different Disney worlds in Kingdom Hearts, sometimes the art style, the character designs, and even entire gameplay mechanics will change based on where you go. I keep referencing the Little Mermaid level in Kingdom Hearts because genuinely when I played this, it was so mind-blowing to me. I love that even at a point so deep into this game, they were still willing to change the fundamental mechanics of how you play it just to keep things fresh.
In the first Kingdom Hearts, it's great. Second Kingdom Hearts, it becomes that terrible sing-along and it isn't not good.
And don't even get me started on the goddamn Gumi ship. I don't know if it's Gumi or Gummy. I've been saying Gumi. When I first played it, it was...
I don't know who the hell would ever pronounce it Gumi. It's freaking gummy. It's spelled gummy. Everything about it says gummy.
Kind of annoying at first. I was thinking, why am I doing this? But now, anymore, I'm traveling between the worlds and I'm up in the Gumi ship. I'm just shooting stuff. Why the hell do they need a spaceship to get between the Disney worlds? I don't know why they thought they needed a spaceship. But it was awesome, and it was the Gumi ship, and shut the fuck up. I'm not entirely sure if this is the case, but it really seems to me like when games were cheaper to make, studios were willing to make pretty much anything and just throw it out there. And listen, I was eating it up. I loved sitting down crisscross applesauce on the floor.
Here's the thing. Yes, games were more willing to test things out when they were cheaper. Are they a lot more expensive now? Yes. Do they need to be more expensive now? No. There's no way it takes the amount of money that they actually put into it. It doesn't require that level of investment, but they do it. There's so much amazing technology that could really simplify the workflow of games, but they want to throw everything in it and the kitchen sink and pretend that spending one entire year of somebody's time just refining the text on the menu or God knows what is worth the extra $100,000 that they threw into it. And then they do that at every level of the game, so it just suddenly becomes this exponentially massive cost. If they focused on the core gameplay mechanics, just tried to make a good game, they would save themselves a ton of money, and they can put a little more towards marketing and probably promote the hell out of it and make a really fun game that they probably get a way better return on investment. But whatever, that's just my opinion on it.
Or of a GameStop, just going through the wall of so many different PS2 games, picking out insane shit like Marvel Nemesis, Rise of the Imperfects. I feel like I dreamed this. Sure, they were goofy and didn't exactly maximize profit, but does that mean they weren't worth making? I guess where AAA is concerned, it's just always going to be about the money. And if you want a passionate game developer, you look to the indie games. There's gotta be some video essay YouTuber to indie game pipeline, because I was never really that into indie games, but recently I played Hades and Rollerdrome, and it was some of the most fun I've had playing games in a long time. While it seems the games that prioritize fun overall are only coming from indie developers anymore, there is a genre of game that was lost to time completely, and that, my friends, is the shitty licensed games. This has got to be the greatest loss in my lifetimes. Those shitty early 2000s movie tie-in licensed games that came with every mildly successful property. If there was a cartoon you liked in the early
Some of these were super fun, though. Some of them were totally worth it.
2000s, tie-in game. If there was a movie you kind of enjoyed, tie-in game. Look up any franchise that had moderate success in this time period and add the game at the end, and you're probably gonna get something. It would be impossible to
Shaolin Showdown, I remember watching the hell out of a lot, too.
count how many there were, and they were all bad, but I loved them anyway. Like the Cat in the Hat movie tie-in game, what a beautiful nightmare that was. Give me a bottle of Dayquil and the Cat in the Hat PS2 game, and I'm having a great week. If you've ever played one of these games before, you've probably seen this little intro screen. THQ. THQ was responsible for not all, but a lot of these tie-in games. It seemed their business model was to buy up the license for a mildly successful property, pump out a cheap, easy game, and launch it right when that movie or TV show was peaking in popularity so that they could feed off of that hype. And clearly it worked, because in the span of a couple of years, they released literal hundreds of games. They hit the cartoons hard. They got Jimmy Neutron, Scooby-Doo, so much SpongeBob, Fairly Odd Parents, Tack and the Motherfudging Power of Juju. This one was a banger.
Yeah, all they needed was a way to make the games, and then they just reskin them, developed a couple levels, and then it's the same mechanics over and over again. It's super easy to do, and it's just fun, simple games.
Rugrats, Teen Titans, Barnyard, Danny Phantom, Avatar The Last Airbender. Seriously, so much SpongeBob. And they hit the movies too. Cars, The Incredibles, Ratatouille, Wall-E, Up. They had Star Wars under their belt, and Episode 3 was a slapper. These guys dominated the licensed tie-in games, and eventually they just stopped. I was looking around the internet trying to figure out why they stopped. You know, where did these go? And everything I found kind of suggested that they didn't stop making them, but they moved over to the more profitable sector of the video game market, the mobile games.
Hey, just was wondering, is this an out-of-season April Fool's joke?
No.
And you know what?
I love that blank smile from the Diablo developers. I'm just like, oh, they really hate this. I don't know how to respond.
They were probably right to do so. Even I ended up spending money in Family Guy: The Quest for Stuff. I wanted to build my Quahog to look cool.
Holy fuck.
There were a lot of these games, and most of them were bad. But for every 100 shitty cookie-cutter games, there was one gem. Odds are, if you had a PS2, you probably played The Simpsons Hit and Run, which by all means should have just been another shitty tie-in in the series of shitty tie-ins. But this one just so happened to be amazing. It was a GTA clone that was like better than GTA. In fact, it did the multiple characters, the character switching, before GTA 5 did it. That means The Simpsons
And parents wouldn't feel bad about getting it for their kids because it wasn't GTA.
predicted GTA 5. It is time to write another Kotaku article. Some of my personal favorites were The Matrix: Path of Neo. I don't know why I liked this. I'd never seen The Matrix. I just really was drawn to this game because it made me feel like insane. I don't know.
One of
I don't
the
know how to
million
describe it. I
games
loved
that
the
have
Star
bullet
Wars
time.
Episode 3 tie-in game because it had this cool alternate ending, and I was obsessed with this fight on Mustafar between Anakin and Obi-Wan, and so being able to do that and get a different result just like blew my little mind. And obviously, Spider-Man 2. I think a lot of people forget this was a movie tie-in game. And even this one had great mini-games. The most iconic mini-game where you go around delivering pizzas with that insane music playing. Why couldn't we get that in Insomniac Spider-Man instead of Match the Shapes and Colors? A licensed tie-in game that a lot of people liked was SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom. And I know a lot of people like this one because it got a big fat remake. We've established that the game studios are in this for the money, right? And it's safe to assume that they want the safest bets for their money, the most revenue with the least risk. No brainer. Why don't they just take things people already like and do it again? but like make it pretty. Personally, I think this aversion to risk is absolutely doing damage to the industry, but what do I know? I'm just a guy, and clearly
Yeah, it just forcing
numbers
people.
say it.
It just forced people to not innovate. And I recently played Persona 3 Reload because I absolutely got hooked on Persona 5 Royal. I was very disappointed when I got back to Persona 3 Reload because the actual like level designs are not great. It's super, super repetitive. And the story itself takes an unreasonable amount of time to get started. Like, I know these games are super long, but Persona 3 Reload took way too long, and I still haven't even beaten it. I'm like 70 or 80 hours into the game, and I still don't really care about most of the characters, which is not something I could remotely say about Persona 5. But it looks pretty. It's got some similar mechanics. It's just not as good, and I can see how it's evolved. And I kind of wish they made some other improvements if they were going to remake it the way they did.
Otherwise. But I think in all of this, the consumer is not blameless. It is me. I'm the consumer. They're only gonna do something if they know we're gonna buy it. And oh man, am I gonna buy it. I've been loving the remakes lately, I'm not gonna lie. I don't really think we needed 5 iterations of the 2 Last of Us games, but for example, like Resident Evil 4 remake or the Dead Space remake, or some of my favorite games in 2023. They may have been remakes, yes, rehashing old ideas, but I felt like in those 2 examples specifically, they expanded the gameplay systems and made changes that honestly justified a remake. In Dead Space alone, the zero gravity overhaul was game changing, as well as a voiced protagonist where there wasn't one before. So they're not just throwing stuff out, you know, they actually do seem to care about some of these games. The Resident Evil 4 remake was a breath of fresh air for me because I got the quality of life from a AAA game, but the goofy, campy fun from a PS2 game. The graphics were stunning and the gameplay was tight and well optimized, and I also got to go up to the shady weapons dealer and buy a rocket launcher to just shoot the final boss with. I just cheesed the entire fight, and the game let me because it was more fun that way. The simplicity that I had been missing was right there, and I loved every second of it. To me, this trend of remakes is proof that I'm not alone in missing a time when video games were simple. And it's also proof that nostalgia can and will be weaponized at any moment possible. And
It always will be. People pay for nostalgia and companies will capitalize on it. Always.
memories are only good if they are profitable. I am happy that younger generations and just more people in general get to experience these games that I loved as a kid and see why for themselves. And also I'm happy that we get to experience these games in ultra-realistic graphics, 4K huevos shrinking technology. Only playable with the Gigafart 8500 graphics card. You may need to upgrade your PC to play this game. I can appreciate good graphics. I mean, I really like when a game looks pretty, but I think this looks better than this. And this looks better than this. Technically, this has higher resolution and better lighting, but this has a better art direction. High resolution textures and pretty lighting are always going to be outshined by inspired art direction, creativity, and a focus on atmosphere. This isn't something that's gone from modern.
I can't do most horror games because I get too into it and too amped up. But the BioShock games, goddamn, I love those games. So damn good. And I got real hooked.
Gaming. In fact, a lot of recent games have left my jaw on the floor because they're so beautiful. Bloodborne, and Bloodborne. Holy shit, Bloodborne. But I think it was
I'm starting to get the vibe that this guy really likes his dark horror themed games.
more common to focus on art direction back then because they were limited. They couldn't make a realistic looking game. They had to do something unique. Even the games shooting for a realistic approach could not pull off realism. I mean, that is not realism, but still, it's iconic. A phrase I really like and I've used before in one of these videos is that limitation breeds creativity. Trying to make a game back on the PS2, I imagine was extremely limiting, but it made them so creative making these incredibly unique looking games. I often find that when creating something and you run into a problem, that solution that you come up with to the problem leads to an infinitely more interesting and unique final product. Like I said, we still get a lot of stunning games coming out lately, but I feel like now with the ability to actually create games that, while not perfectly realistic, look pretty damn real, that becomes the only focus, is making a game that looks realistic, not one that is creative in its visuals. In a lot of ways, I miss those older games that we used to get, but I'm also glad for all the games that we get now. Like Ghost of Tsushima is one of my favorite games of all time, and Baldur's Gate 3, which I made an entire video on, you should go watch it, was a phenomenal experience. Compare that.
I spent an ungodly amount of time in Baldur's Gate 3, but I'm also a D&D nerd, so I'm kind of their target audience.
To the PS2 Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance 2, and it's no contest there. The only reason I might want to pick up and play Dark Alliance 2 is because I miss playing it with my dad when I was a kid. I used to live in this big greenhouse right on the corner lot and had a baseball field right across the street. I think the house used to be a church. It was definitely haunted. I was 8 years old when that house caught fire. I remember I was watching SpongeBob and I walked into the kitchen and I saw these crazy flames up all over the place. Long story short, the house got completely ruined and my dad got hurt pretty bad. But he recovered fine. They just took some skin from his butt and put it on his hand. I call it his butt hand. This house though was mostly ruined, and the property had a separate garage, like a barn kind of thing, and that garage had an attic. Well, my dad decided that we were gonna fix up the house ourselves and live up in that attic. Him and I shared this airbed up there, and right next to it was a projector that I had hooked up my PlayStation 2 and my original Xbox to. During the day, I'd obviously go to school, and then when I got home, I'd help him build however I could. You know, there wasn't much I could do. I was 8, but I remember doing things like helping him put up the ceiling or chip away at the old stone slate in the fireplace. And when we were done for the day, I would go up and play on that PS2 nonstop. Not to get into too much detail, I'm just some guy on the internet. You don't know me. But I was having a hard time. Something about swinging around the city in Spider-Man 2 just made it all melt away, you know? I wasn't Zach with all this stress and all these problems I didn't understand. I was Spider-Man. I can only imagine how my dad felt at the time, but he always seemed happy when him and I were playing a video game together. He was just watching me play one, but we had a ton of fun and we would just laugh and hang out together playing Halo 2 on the Xbox, just going through the campaign. And it was in moments like that where it really felt like everything melted away. It didn't feel like we had just lost everything. You know, it felt like we had everything that we could ever need. And it's funny, now sometimes just hearing that PS2 sound, I'm back up in the attic with my dad. Nostalgia is a funny thing that can make you look back.
Honestly, there are so many points like that for me in gaming. And I'm never going to forget. I rented a game after school on a Friday. And I started playing it. And it was one of the first games that made me fall in love with storytelling in video games. I didn't know how much I got hooked on it until my dad came into my room and said, "What the fuck are you still doing up?" And it turned out it was 6 o'clock in the morning and I hadn't stopped playing since the day before. That's when I knew I really liked that game. It was Final Fantasy X, by the way.
Fondly on things that might not have been so great, but were somehow perfect in their own way. And escapism through simple pleasures like video games will always be important. I think we all have that game, or just media in general, that was able to give us a break from a hard time in our lives and made us hold on to that experience forever. And so now we judge that media by what it did for us rather than what it actually is. I'd love to hear if there was anything like that that stuck with you, you know, either in a comment or send it to my email at this point. I don't care. I can't promise I'll get back to you, but if you want to, shoot me an email. I might see it. Thank you so much for over 100,000 subscribers. Geek really likes the plaque, so that's good. We send it off to him. He's the real hero here. 100K is crazy. You know, I started another channel a while ago and it took me so long. I was trying so hard to get to 100K. And with this one, I wasn't even trying. I just kind of did it. I mean, We did it, I guess. I don't know. That shit's cool. This is a cool thing to do. This is my simple pleasure now. So please simply click the card right here and watch another video. This got way too sappy. Click on some other funny shit, please. Okay.
Yeah, I know that feeling. You don't want a video to ever get too serious, but I do miss those days when games were simple and they were just focused on fun and being an escape. Those were kind of better times. Now they're too competitive and filled with kids shouting racial slurs and making the whole experience terrible and toxic. But I like my fun games that I can just have a good time with.